The first thing I remember is the sound of the board striking the floor. It was a narrow pine board, smooth from years of being stored beneath the bed, and when it slipped between us, it hit the floorboards with a hard crack that seemed loud enough to wake every person in the house. I froze under the quilt. Beside me, Anna stopped breathing for a moment. Downstairs, the kitchen clock continued its slow ticking, and somewhere beyond the window, a horse shifted against the cold. My father had warned me about that room. He had warned me about that house. Most of all, he had warned me about the kind of confidence a young man mistakes for strength. I did not listen. Before the next Sunday came, half the settlement knew I had stayed until morning. 3 weeks later, I stood beside Anna before the bishop and took her as my wife. I loved her, that was true, but I also married her carrying a shame I did not know how to name. My name is Jonas. I am an Amish husband, a father, and the head of a household of my own now. I share these stories because our way of life is often described from the outside, where rules can look simple and decisions can look clean. They rarely are. If you have ever made a choice for the right reason and the wrong reason at the same time, you will understand this story, and I would be glad to hear whether you believe shame can ever lead a person towards something good. I was 21 that winter. Anna was 19. We had known each other since childhood, but knowing a girl at school and courting a young woman are not the same thing. She had become quiet in a way that made a man listen. She laughed easily with her sisters, but when she spoke directly to me, she chose every word. I admired that. Our families lived several miles apart. In good weather, I could make the trip in a little under an hour with a fast horse. That January, the roads were packed with snow and iron-hard ruts. The trip took closer to 90 minutes, and the cold came through my gloves before I had passed the second farm. Bundling was not practiced in every home, and even where it was allowed, the rules differed. In Anna's family, a courting couple could lie fully clothed beneath separate covers, with a wooden board placed between them. The bedroom door remained unlatched. Her parents slept below. It was not permission for foolishness. It was a test of restraint, trust, and intention. My father disliked the custom. The afternoon before I left, he stood in our workshop sharpening a draw knife. Curled shavings covered the floor around his boots. He did not look up when he spoke. "A dark room does not change what is right," he said. I told him I knew that. He pulled the blade once more across the stone and wiped it with a rag. Knowing is not the same as remembering. That was all. My father was not a man who repeated himself. I arrived at Anna's home after supper. Snow clung to the lower half of my trousers, and my beard had begun to stiffen with frost. Her mother poured me coffee. Her father asked about a wagon wheel I had repaired for a neighbor. We sat around the table for nearly an hour, while the lamp flame bent whenever the wind pressed against the window. Nothing about the evening felt dangerous. That is important to understand. Trouble rarely announces itself in a frightening voice. Sometimes it comes in warmth after a long ride, in the smell of coffee and wood smoke, in the face of someone you already hope to marry. Near 10 o'clock, Anna's parents said goodnight. Her mother carried an extra quilt upstairs and placed it at the foot of the bed. The bundling board was already there. Anna wore a long, dark dress with a heavy night shawl over her shoulders. I remained in my trousers, shirt, vest, and wool socks. We lay above the sheet, each under a separate quilt. For the first hour, we talked as we had talked many times before. We spoke about the farm I hoped to rent from my uncle. We counted what livestock we might afford. 2 milk cows, perhaps 6 hens, and 1 steady horse if the harvest was good. Anna wanted a kitchen window facing east. I told her I could build a table before I could promise a window. She laughed softly and said, "Then I will eat breakfast in the dark." That sentence stayed with me, not because it was important, but because it was ordinary. It belonged to a future we had begun to imagine together. The house grew colder after midnight. The stove below had burned low. Frost formed in the corners of the glass. We continued talking, though our voices became quieter. At some point, Anna told me she was afraid my father did not approve of her family. I said he respected them. She asked why he had warned me not to come. I should have answered honestly. I should have said that he did not distrust her. He distrusted me. Instead, I said my father was old-fashioned. That was a cowardly answer. Our community was old-fashioned by nearly any measure, but I used the words to make his warning seem smaller than it was. Sometime after 1, I shifted beneath the quilt. My knee pressed against the bundling board. It tilted, then settled. Anna reached down to straighten it. My hand reached at the same moment. Our fingers touched. There was nothing scandalous in that touch. We had held hands before, but the room was dark, the house was silent, and we were lying close enough to hear each other breathe. I felt the certainty of a young man who believes that because he intends marriage, every boundary between courtship and marriage is merely waiting to be crossed. I lifted the board. Anna whispered my name. I told her it was uncomfortable. That was not the truth. I placed it against the wall beside the bed. We remained fully clothed. We did not do what gossip later claimed. But I put my arm around her, and she rested her head against my shoulder. We stayed that way for a long time. It would be easy for me to tell you I was overcome by affection, or that the moment carried us beyond judgment. That would make a better story, and a poorer confession. I knew the rule. I knew why it existed. I chose to set it aside because I believed my feelings made me an exception. Then the board slipped. It struck the floor with that hard crack. We separated at once. I sat upright, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. Footsteps moved below us. A chair scraped across the kitchen floor. Anna's father came halfway up the stairs and stopped. "Everything well?" he called. Anna answered that the board had fallen. There was a silence. Not a long silence, perhaps 3 seconds, but I remember every part of it. "Put it back," he said. I set the board between us again. My hands shook. We did not speak for the rest of the night. I should have left then. Even in the cold, even on a difficult road, I should have harnessed my horse and gone home. But I was ashamed to walk downstairs and face her father. So I remained in the bed, staring at the black ceiling while the hours passed. That was my second failure. The first was removing the boundary. The second was allowing shame to make my next decision for me. I fell asleep shortly before dawn. When I woke, pale light filled the room. Anna was already standing beside the bed, fastening her shawl. Downstairs, pans were moving in the kitchen. I could smell fried potatoes and coffee. It was an ordinary morning, but I felt as though the whole house had changed. At breakfast, Anna's father spoke very little. Her mother did not look directly at me. Anna's younger brother stared until his sister kicked his boot beneath the table. I left before 8. The temperature had fallen overnight. The leather reins felt like strips of iron in my hands. My father was in the barn when I returned. He looked once at my face and knew something had happened. I told him the board had fallen. I told him I had removed it first. I told him we had done nothing more. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he lifted a forkful of hay into the manger and said, "Then speak the truth before someone else speaks it for you." By Sunday, someone else already had. A cousin of Anna's had heard her parents talking. From there, the story moved as stories do. The board had fallen. Then the board had never been used. Then I had stayed in her room after sunrise. By the time we gathered for worship, people were not asking what had happened. They were deciding what it meant. No public accusation was made. No one dragged us before the congregation. That is not how every matter is handled. But the bishop spoke privately with both families. He asked me direct questions. I gave direct answers. Anna did the same. He did not order us to marry. I want to make that clear. We were adults, and the decision remained ours. But he told us that courtship could not continue as though nothing had happened. Either we were moving toward marriage with honest intention, or we needed to step apart. I had planned to ask Anna in the spring. I had imagined doing it after planting, when I could show her the rented farm and the small house I hoped to repair. Instead, I walked to her father's workshop on a gray Tuesday afternoon with mud on my boots and shame in my stomach. I asked for permission to marry her. He studied me for a long time. Then he said, "Do not marry my daughter merely to quiet other people." That was the one sentence I needed to hear. I went to Anna afterward. She stood near the wash line behind the house, pinning shirts beneath a sky the color of tin. I told her what her father had said. I told her I loved her, but I no longer trusted my own reason for asking. I did not know whether I was choosing marriage because I wanted a life with her or because I wanted the whispers to stop. Anna held a wooden clothespin between her fingers. She looked at me and said, "The whispers will stop. We still have to live together after they do." There was no anger in her voice. That made the words heavier. We postponed the decision for 1 week. During that week, I did not visit her after dark. I worked, I prayed, I spoke with my father, I walked alone to the farm I hoped to rent, and stood inside the empty kitchen. There was no east-facing window. I pictured Anna eating breakfast there anyway. I pictured her hands shaping bread on the table I had not yet built. I pictured illness, poor harvests, children, disagreements, and winters much harder than that one. The picture did not frighten me away. That was when I understood that shame was pushing me toward the wedding, but love was asking me to stay for the marriage. I returned to Anna's home and asked again. This time, I did not mention the gossip, the bishop, or the bundling night. I told her I wanted to build a household with her and that I would still want it if no one else knew our names. She said yes. We married 3 weeks later. It was sooner than either family had expected. Some people assumed that proved the rumors. Others believed the wedding had been arranged to protect our reputations. I cannot control what they believed. On our wedding morning, I felt joy. I also felt shame. Both stood beside me. For the first years of our marriage, I rarely spoke about that night. Whenever it came to mind, I treated it as a stain on the beginning of our life together. I thought a good husband should erase it through hard work, faithfulness, and silence. Anna understood it differently. Many years later, after our oldest child had begun courting, she and I were sitting at the kitchen table. The lamp was low. Snow pressed against the windows, much as it had on that earlier night. Our son had asked whether we trusted him. Anna looked across the table and said, "Trust does not mean pretending temptation is not real." She was not speaking only about him. We told our son the truth, not every detail. A child does not need every private memory of his parents. But we told him that I had crossed a boundary, that Anna had not stopped me firmly enough, and that we had both learned how quickly affection can become self-justification. I also told him something my father had known before I did. A rule cannot make a man honorable. It can only give him a place to stop before he discovers how weak he is. I used to believe the shame of that bundling night forced me into marriage. That is not quite true. Shame hurried the hour. It stripped away the comfortable delay. It made me answer a question I had hoped to postpone. But shame could not build the marriage. It did not carry water when Anna was ill. It did not keep me beside her when we lost a child before birth. It did not teach us to forgive sharp words or stretch flour through a poor winter. Shame burned hot and then faded. What remained was the daily choice we had made beneath it. That is what I understand now. A wrong choice can stand at the beginning of something good without becoming the reason that good thing lasts. You do not honor the good by pretending the wrong never happened. You honor it by telling the truth, accepting the weight of it, and choosing better when the next choice comes. I married Anna sooner because I was ashamed. But I stayed and she stayed because we learned how to love each other after the whispers ended. If these quiet stories from Amish life mean something to you, you are welcome to subscribe and join me for the next one. And I would like to ask you this. Do you believe a marriage can begin for mixed reasons and still become honest with time? I read the comments and I value the thought you bring to them.